This week on the Brody File, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, home to President Barack Obama. But not for long. Some of the country's top conservatives are making a mad dash for the White House. On this special edition of the Brody File, we take an in-depth look at the contenders vying for a seat in the Oval Office, the big names you know, and the up-and-coming names you should. The Brody File, that's a name you should know. We're ready for 2016, and we're on across America next. Welcome to this very special 2016 Battle for the White House edition of the Brody File. I'm Jennifer Wishon, filling in for David Brody, who we suspect is recovering from one too many holiday meals. On this week's show, we're taking a look at the top conservative contenders making a move for the presidency. Jeb Bush broke the political internet when he announced that he would actively explore a 2016 presidential run. While his stance on immigration may not rub well with some conservatives, many suspect he'll have no problem gaining the financial support he needs. Speaking of political families, Hillary Clinton is the clear frontrunner for the Democratic Party. In fact, according to a recent NBC Wall Street Journal poll, Clinton is the frontrunner, period, but just by a hair. 50% of American voters say they could see themselves voting for Clinton in 2016. That still leaves 48% that say they would not vote for Clinton. Of course, Bush and Clinton are household political names, but we're spending the next half hour looking at some of the interviews we've conducted with four others who stand a chance at grabbing their party's nomination, starting with the first Indian American to be elected governor, Bobby Jindal. I traveled to Louisiana to learn more about what drives his public service.
You can spend hours looking at these pictures.
Bobby Jindal grew up not far from the governor's mansion here in Baton Rouge. His dad wanted him to be a doctor. But despite getting into medical and law schools at both Harvard and Yale, Jindal chose a life of public service.
Technically, your name is not Bobby.
That's right. You know, the story my mom loves to tell everybody. When I was 4 years old, I used to come home from school, and at the time, I was allowed to watch a little bit of TV, and one of the shows that was on in syndication was The Brady Bunch. It was one of my favorite shows. I'd watch it every afternoon. And if you remember, Bobby Brady was the youngest boy on that show. And I guess I just identified with him because we were the same age, we probably had the same interest. You know, we didn't like girls or whatever, we liked to play football. So one day my mom was picking me up from school, and the teacher said, "Well, your son's got a new name." And she said, "What are you talking about?" Apparently, I just showed up one day without telling her, without asking her for permission, showed up and told all my friends to call me Bobby from that day on, and they did.
His parents immigrated here to Louisiana from India looking for a better life. Jindal says he ran for public office to ensure their grandchildren don't have to leave the state to achieve their American dream.
My parents, but my dad especially, has lived the American dream. One of 9 kids, only one that got past the 5th grade, literally grew up in that house without electricity, without running water. Worked extremely hard, got his first job by calling companies out of the yellow pages until somebody would hire him here in Baton Rouge.
As the son of immigrants, is this debate over immigration reform personal to you?
This, to me, is such a simple issue where we are today. We don't need a 1,000-page bill, a comprehensive bill out of the Senate. We need to secure the border. I think that it's pretty simple. You know, the president keeps talking about it. We need to just do it. And the reality is, if he was serious about it, he's been president now, he's in his 2nd term, this could have been done by now. There's no excuse for this.
Despite his southern drawl, Jindal is an extremely fast talker who rarely misses a chance to call out the president.
I think the biggest frustration right now is the rest of the country versus D.C.
He knows something about Washington, having served 2 terms in Congress. Now, as a 2-term governor, he's making education reform a priority.
One of the things, the most important things we've done is to really give parents, to trust parents in terms of educating their kids.
You have changed your mind on Common Core standards for Louisiana. What changed for you?
I think this was originally presented as a bottom-up approach, and instead has become a top-down approach. To me, this is the same fight you see when the left tells you, we can't trust the American people to buy big gulps. We can't trust the American people to exercise their Second Amendment rights. We can't trust the American people to have religious liberty.
Jindal and his wife, Supriya, have a girl and 2 boys of their own to think about educating.
My kids were 6, 3, and 1 when we moved in the mansion.
That was 6 years ago. After long labors with their first 2 children, Supriya knew their third child, Slade, wouldn't wait for the hospital, giving Jindal a chance to finally play the profession his dad dreamed for him, literally delivering his son at home.
And she was in all this pain, and she was literally on the floor. I mean, there's no time to get prepared. When I saw our son covered in this purple goo, I was thinking, he doesn't look like he's done. I mean, maybe we should put him back in for a little while. When I handed her our child for the first time, all of that pain went away. She wasn't thinking about anything but her little baby boy, and I fell in love with her all over again.
You grew up in a Hindu home, right? How did you then make this transformation into what you call an evangelical Catholic?
You know, I'd love to tell you I had a sudden epiphany. It wasn't that easy. You know, some people, it really is easy. You know, they get hit over the head, and I think that's great. For me, it was a 7-year process.
A journey of intense reading, study, and self-examination. It all clicked one day while attending a church production with a friend.
In the middle of it, they showed a little film, nothing fancy. Black and white film where there was an actor playing Jesus being crucified. Now, we've probably seen 1,000 better movies. It was black and white, no famous actors, the camera was probably shaking. But for some reason, when I saw the actor on the cross, God chose that moment to hit me harder than I've ever been hit before. All of a sudden, it just hit me. That's really the Son of God. If he's up there on that cross, not for 1 billion people, that's too easy. He's up there because of Bobby Jindal. If he's dying up there because of my sins, because of what I've done, what I've failed to do, how arrogant for me to do anything but to get on my knees and worship him.
After the last presidential election, you said the Republican Party was acting stupid. As we approach 2016, has the party grown any smarter?
When I said we've got to stop being the stupid party, we've got to offer solutions. We cannot just be the anti-party. We've got to be for things. I think that this is still a center-right country. And I think if we will present specific solutions, if we go out there and fight for every vote and say, not only do we oppose what the other side is doing, we've got better ideas.
What is the greatest threat facing America right now?
I don't think we can be beat by an external enemy. I think the greatest threat to America comes from within. We are blessed to be in the greatest country in the history of the world. But it's not inevitably so. We've got to renew that every generation. I think the biggest threat is that erosion of what it means to pursue the American dream. It's that assault on religious liberty. It's the undermining of what makes us an exceptional country.
He's not shy when it comes to talking about who he consults about the future.
It's like Jesus, it's like God gives us the book of life. He doesn't let us look at every page, but he lets us look at the last page. And the last page, our God wins. He beats death, he beats Satan, he gets up off that cross. We should rejoice and we should live our lives with grace, glory, and humility, animated by that sense that we worship an all-risen, all-powerful God who's got plans that we won't necessarily understand.
That's Governor Bobby Jindal here on the Brody File. Up next, the doctors are making house calls, but are they ready for the White House? We take an intimate look at Dr. Ben Carson and Senator Rand Paul, yeah, he's a doctor too, when the special 2016 Battle for the White House edition of the Brody File rolls on. Welcome back. Before the break, we spent time with Governor Bobby Jindal. Now, it's no secret that a lot of presidents make the leap directly from the governor's mansion to the White House. So it's no surprise when conservatives throw support behind a man like Jindal or even Indiana Governor Mike Pence. We recently traveled to the Hoosier State to see if the fiscally conservative, pro-traditional marriage Indiana executive has what it takes to make a run for president.
When you meet Mike Pence, he's all-American heartland, from a cornfield to Congress and now governor.
I don't ever remember even imagining that this grandson of an Irish immigrant would ever have the chance to lead my state as governor.
And he's making the most of the opportunity with an approval rating over 60% and one of the top economies in the nation.
Indiana is open for tech business once again. We are grateful for your leadership and your vision.
The numbers show a conservative blueprint for success. 7 straight months of job growth with unemployment under 6%, leading the nation in new manufacturing jobs, plus throw in tax cuts and a budget surplus for good measure.
There's no rocket science to it. We're just putting into practice those common sense principles of living within our means, letting people keep more of what they earn.
The Republican Party is taking notice. Some GOP bigwigs are courting Pence, and the governor is listening. They see him as an ideal presidential candidate. Pro-life Christian, strong on social issues, a hawk on defense, and economically conservative. He's taking his platform to the international stage, and he's going to speak at national GOP functions, stoking presidential interest even further.
All right, now look, every time we speak, I always have to ask you a president. You know I'm going to ask you a presidential. We did this last time. We always do this.
Just a couple years ago, Congressman Pence and I discussed a 2012 presidential run right there in his D.C. office after he won a conservative straw poll.
This is the part of the interview where I ask you the obligatory 2012 question, and this is the obligatory part where you just say, oh, you know, honored to be considered. So let's just go through the formalities here. All right.
So here we are again, 2 years later, trying to figure out a more unique way to pop the question.
Forget about what you think. When Karen and the family hear these, they read the newspaper, they have Google, don't they? What do they think? Forget about you.
Well, I can tell you, any time that I'm mentioned for the highest office in the land is it's a humbling and an encouraging thing for me and for my family. But our focus is on Indiana.
He's also keenly aware that the best solutions need to come from outside the Beltway.
And I'm absolutely convinced that the cure for what ails this country is going to come more from our nation's state capitals than it ever will from our nation's capital. There are just things that states will always be able to do better.
One item not up for debate, his faith.
Just about each and every day, I like to start out my day with a little bit of time in the book, a little bit of time in prayer. And that's become even more important to me as I've shouldered the responsibilities of this office.
Pence gave his life to Jesus as a college freshman, and now as governor, he's mindful of Solomon's prayer in 1 Kings 3, where it says, "Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this your great people?"
It's a prayer I pray often, that for a discerning heart to distinguish between right and wrong. For as he asked, who is able to govern this great people of yours?
And in Indiana, it's Governor Pence for such a time as this.
Mike Pence is definitely a man to watch in the coming year. All right, when we come back, the other side of Rand Paul. We're headed to Central America as the Kentucky senator gives us a special glimpse inside the operating room. That story and more as this special Battle for the White House edition of the Brody File continues. Welcome back. He's been called the most interesting man in politics. He's a former ophthalmologist and son of a popular congressman. We're talking about Senator Rand Paul, and you'll never guess where I caught up with him. In Guatemala, as he performed eye surgeries for desperate patients. Take a look. This is the unknown side of Senator Rand Paul.
Right now we're opening up the capsule.
Licensed ophthalmologist performing cataract surgery. After practicing medicine for nearly 30 years, Washington forced him to give up a huge part of his life.
I thought when I was elected I would actually get to practice medicine and get to do surgery, and then I was told I wasn't allowed other than I can do it for charity. So I do some in Kentucky 4 or 5 times a year.
And now in Latin America. He joined a team of doctors from the Moran Eye Center at the University of Utah to perform hundreds of surgeries in Salima, a town right in the middle of Guatemala.
This is your passion, right?
Yeah, I love doing surgery, and I first got interested in ophthalmology because my grandmother had a lot of problems.
Why Guatemala? Some say it's Paul paving his vision for the future. There's some truth to that, but this Latin connection goes back nearly 20 years. That's when the Hernandez brothers traveled to Bowling Green so Paul could operate on their eyes.
Hold your hand, mira aquí.
Here in Salima, this ophthalmologist is one of only 2 serving nearly 1 million people. In the U.S., there's one for every 20,000. And with more than half of all Guatemalans living below the poverty line, even with access, most can't afford eye care. So people lined up early and waited patiently for a chance to see again.
I feel blessed.
39 million people in the world are blind. 90% of them live in poverty, and most of them could be cured if they had proper access to eye care. Young children in developing countries who go blind only live another year or two. That's why doctors here put up with the cameras and chaos following Paul, hoping it will shine a light on the burden of global blindness. Paul wanted to focus attention on his surgical skills, but when he invited the cameras, some suspected was to cast himself in a new light for some conservatives who see him as weak on foreign policy, something he calls a dirty rumor.
Some of the narrative is driven by people who are competitors who would like to be the one leading the party or leading what our party stands for. But the bottom line is I'm a big follower of Ronald Reagan and believe in peace through strength, and I believe it's the #1 priority of the government is to defend us against foreign attack.
This year, authorities have apprehended more than 60,000 unaccompanied children and another 60,000 adults with children illegally crossing the U.S. border, many from Guatemala. Senator Paul talked with the nation's president about a solution he thinks could ease the pressure.
There are thousands of people who in America who want to adopt kids from Guatemala. A lot of kids don't have parents or don't have sufficient support here. So really, part of the answer is legal immigration. Let's have more legal immigration. Let's have more adoption.
And when it comes to Washington's immigration stalemate, Paul's sticking to his demand to secure the border before anything else.
But it's interesting, securing isn't always sort of fence or barbed wire or things like that. Securing is also having an adequate work program, because we actually want people to come to our country to work. 400,000 people come to pick crops every year in America. So it's a matter of trying to figure out how to do it in an orderly fashion.
Meanwhile, he's sending all the signals that he's running for president.
I think all of us want to do what they're most effective at doing, and it's whether or not that'll be as a senator from Kentucky or as a physician from Kentucky or running for another office. It's whether or not you can have an effect and an impact and do something that will make the country better.
Time will tell. Senator Rand Paul here on the Brody File. When we come back, another doctor, Ben Carson, with tough talk about President Obama's policies. Could the good doctor make a run for the White House in the near future? We travel to his home in sunny Florida for a one-on-one next. Welcome back to this very special Battle for the White House edition of the Brody File. The last stop on our presidential contender show leads us to the Sunshine State with Dr. Ben Carson. Carson made headlines, you may remember, when he publicly berated Obamacare at the National Prayer Breakfast a few years back. But the retired neurosurgeon has a real shot at the White House. The Run, Ben, Run committee has representatives on the ground in all 99 counties in Iowa. They've also secured more financial support than Hillary Clinton's Political Action Committee. Get that. David Brody talked to Carson to learn more about his past and what could be a very presidential future.
Dr. Ben Carson is known as a straight shooter, whether it's pool or talking politics.
Obamacare is really, I think, the worst thing that has happened in this nation since slavery.
His no-nonsense approach captivates conservative audiences, and now the massively organized Draft Ben Carson for President movement has positioned him near the top of presidential polls. Indeed, it looks like he might be ready to move from medicine to politics. But first, he says God would have to grab him by the collar.
And how is that conversation going with God about this potential presidential run? Has he grabbed you by the collar yet? I read an article about that.
I feel fingers.
A presidential run would only add to Carson's achievements.
My life has been truly amazing. I think about it all the time.
His well-documented journey is told in the book and movie Gifted Hands. It begins in Detroit, where he was raised by a single mom. Poor grades followed, along with a violent temper that led him to a stabbing incident with a friend. On that day, the knife miraculously hit the boy's belt buckle, giving young Ben Carson another chance to turn his life around. And he took it. Alone in his house, he picked up a Bible, gave his life to Jesus, and asked the Lord to take away his violent temper.
Never had another anger problem since that day. And some people say you just learn how to cover it up, but when the Lord fixes a problem, he fixes it. He doesn't do a paint job. So, it's virtually impossible to make me angry now.
And if the doctor becomes a presidential candidate, he says his cool demeanor is going to help him.
I'm not going to take the bait. I'm not going to get angry. It's just not going to happen.
This could be the essence of a Carson for President campaign. A calm doctor dispensing ideas and leading a conversation on pressing issues, seeking reconciliation.
Americans have to recognize that we, the American people, are not each other's enemies. The enemies are those people who try to divide everybody up.
For example, those calling pro-lifers anti-women or traditional marriage supporters anti-gay.
They've been reading a book by Saul Alinsky called Rules for Radicals, which says never have a conversation with your enemies because that humanizes them. And your job is to demonize them.
Right now, Carson is putting together his platform. He wants a fairer and flatter tax structure, lower corporate taxes, and health savings accounts for all. But his number one issue, the out-of-control debt.
Unless we get a grip on that, why wouldn't we suffer the same fates as other pinnacle nations who have allowed debt to encumber their progress?
Carson also will not let political correctness get in his way. He plans to speak his mind on issues like the roots of this country.
We are, in fact, a Judeo-Christian nation. And I think that's a huge part of our strength.
Or comparing our current government to Nazi Germany.
And I know you're not supposed to say Nazi Germany, but I don't care about political correctness.
He talks straight about President Obama, too.
Our president is very much like Putin, you know. Oh, well, gee, there's no resistance here. Okay, well, I'll just keep going. And the resistance needs to be there.
What would you want to tell him?
I would want to tell him, sir, I understand that you have very defined ideals of what you think America is, but you work for the people. They don't work for you.
Constitutional authority, he has overstepped that, you believe, in many instances?
Without question.
Carson says it's up to the people to change America's direction.
People need to recognize that they do have power, but they do have to exercise it. It is our God-given duty to exercise that power.
And he's praying for God to show his power in a mighty way.
Dr. Ben Carson on the Brody File. More from this special Battle for the White House edition of the Brody File next. Thank you for joining us for this special edition of the Brody File. There's no doubt 2015 will be an electrifying political year. We look forward to covering it. I'm Jennifer Wishon. For all of us here at the Brody File, see you on the campaign trail.